Today we're going to be looking at a song of mine. It's an older song. It's one that I wrote probably back in 2017, 2018. This is not going to be a session where we do a ton of composition. This is more of a mixing and mastering session. There are a couple things that I know up front. There is a small kind of bit of white noise in one of the melodics that makes it seem like there's a buzz in the song. It's not actually something that will cause any harm to headphones or speakers or anything like that. However, it is something that, especially if you're playing something live with an audio engineer or a sound guy, etc., will probably make them feel like something was wrong with their speakers. So I want to get rid of that first and foremost. But I do know it's towards the beginning, so we're going to take a look at that. The other thing that I think I want to take a look at is just balancing the mix a little bit. I think that the low end is a little bit too present. Oftentimes on bigger speakers, you don't need a lot of low end. I'm leaving a little bit of space for the rest of the song to breathe in. So I want to pull back the low end a little bit, maybe make the kick have a little bit more punch, percussion maybe slightly crisper, and then the melodics. The main last thing is I want the melodics to have a little bit more balance and a little bit more present. Overall, the song is in a pretty good place, but I think there are a couple small tweaks that I've thought about for a little bit. The first thing I'm going to do is I don't want you to sit around here waiting, so I wanted to say thank you for that. We're not going to be mixing at this part, but I just want to give you an idea of what the song sounds like. Okay, so that's the song. We're going to go to the intro, and we're mainly going to focus on the melodics. So I have most of my melodics in here. I'm going to isolate that. I'm going to put on a loop right over here, because this is where a lot of that first section is playing, and I think the buzz is in there. So this, I think I can comfortably roll off. I think I know what it is, because I think it's just when the trumpet is on top of this. So I need to actually take a look at something here. And I think the trumpet is still a little bit loud. Now the question is, what happens if I kind of get rid of some of the lower end of the trumpet? It loses a tiny bit of texture, but it opens up more space. Okay, so that's the trumpet. Let me go to the melodics. There's still something happening here. I think I figured out what was going on. There's a little bit too much compression on actually the stack channel rather than any on the individual one. So even though I balanced everything, the compressor was up at 3, which was causing, especially because I had a distortion on, it was causing a little bit of distortion. So if I have it plus 0.5 dB rather than plus 3 dB, a lot of that distortion goes away. I think a lot of the imbalance that I was hearing, and the reason why it felt a bit off, was because it was kind of trying to compensate for hiding that sound a little bit. And now that that's gone, which was just a tiny bit of over compression, which is interesting. I'm not surprised by that. I should have thought of that sooner. But now that that's done, we can listen to this and kind of see what the song looks like. I'm also for a second here going to turn off the limiter on the master. So the next thing that I'm hearing is we're going to take a look at this section. What I'm hearing here is I think that the snare can punch through a little bit more. There's a really fine balance with hi-hats, because hi-hats really will brighten a song up, but if they're too loud, it can be very annoying to the ear. The next thing that I can think of is the kick drum. I can potentially have a bit punchier. I'm going to look at that last, because I think that's the quickest fix, and also I want to hear everything else before I do that. So I want to look at the side chaining between the drums and the melodics and see if that's happening at all. Maybe not the trumpet, but at least with the melodics, I think I'm going to want there to be a little bit of movement around the drums, and it will kind of snap everything into focus a little bit more. So that's the first thing that I'm going to do. Is I want to open this, and I want to see where this is side chained to. And it does look like that it's side chained to the drums already, which is good. So the first thing that I'm hearing after working on that compressor a little bit, which I think has the drums punched through a little bit better, is there is a snare that I think is a little bit too loud. Okay. I actually think the problem was opposite. It wasn't that was too loud, it was that the other ones were too quiet. So this does sound better to me. I think One thing that I actually want to do right now with the drums before I kind of wind it down is, as I mentioned, the hi-hats. So my thought process here is I actually think there's a little bit of room to make the drums slightly just overall louder by maybe just 1 dB. But I think if I do that, the hi-hats are going to become very annoying. So I'm going to pull them back by about 2 dB. Then I'm going to go to the track stack for the drums, and I'm going to go to the compressor and lower the compression dB, and I'm going to slightly raise the output dB. It is not going into a limiter. Perfect. Okay, I think in the melodics this is still a bit loud. There's something weird in there. Oh, there's something in the drums. Oh, yeah, I know what it is. I think I had done some kind of drum layer using a Logic tool, but I might not have downloaded it in a while, or have had it for a while. Whatever that was just adding in a melodic, like a low sign, rather than actually whatever maybe texture or drum pattern that I had going on there. So I'm just going to mute that, and that cleans that up. That's gone. Okay, there's a lot going on in this section that I don't think sounds particularly good. The things that I heard there are, I think one of the trumpets is mismatched. There is definitely some sound design stuff that's mismatched. So I think the trumpet is the easiest fix, because this big chunk right there, actually I think this guitar is really quiet. Okay, so I think I've got this pretty well balanced now. And for the second half of the song, there's a lot more sound design elements, especially like in the mid bass range, and so I think I'm going to actually skip forward a little bit here. Now, a lot of what I'm doing right now, and the main point of what I'm doing right now, is I really want to get a lot of these elements balanced, because the more balanced they are, the less variance there is between, like if one section comes in overly loud and then the next section comes in a little bit quieter, then when you run it through compression, you have to have more level balancing. What I want to do is I want to get most of them balanced, even if they're not necessarily the loudest possible sound individually. If I have them balanced at the master level, then from there I'm able to actually push it a little bit more with the multipressor, with the limiter, etc. And then looking at the multimeter here, when I hit play, you know, this section it's gotten a little bit quieter. Before it was around -7 LUFS, and now it's at around -11, -10, -11. It's definitely quieter by a little bit, but I can always bring that back on the master channel. I'm not worried about like the final output volume. I want to make sure that everything is mixed clean going into that. And this is probably the biggest change since I was writing songs over the past few years, was that I started to understand this process a lot better in the songwriting process. The main thing I'm looking at right now is I just turned off the limiter on the master, and I want to see whether or not it's peaking when I'm listening to it, whether or not it's clipping at all. I'm not actually too worried about it. Like if something occasionally blips it, that'll get caught in the limiter, no problem. And we're just going to be watching over here on the bottom left. So we can see that it didn't clip. If you're sending it to a mastering engineer, give them 3 to 6 dB of headroom in your final mix for them. So basically right now I know I have about 1.5 dB to 2 dBs of extra headroom before it starts to get a little bit crispy again. I know that this section is not peaking at all. Also, I have to remember that I have limiters on most of my channels, or at least on most of my stacks, so I wouldn't necessarily see peaking. But that explains why it didn't peak at all. Yeah, so it is peaking. The sub, like the mid bass over here, is definitely peaking a little bit. And then the other sound design is pretty loud too. Yeah. Okay, so basically what I'm doing here is I did test the limiter on the Sound Design 2 channel. A lot of these kind of noises are coming from. Right. I think the mix overall on these different sounds is pretty bad. Before I get to the compressor, let me look at the mix. Okay, that one I think is pretty loud. This one could be a tiny bit quieter. It's a chain on it. The filter, spread, EQ, okay. And then I think I actually wanted to sidechain this to the drums instead of the kick. I did want to sidechain it again. There's another way to do this, but I'm just going to do it with another compressor. And then I wanted this to actually sidechain to the kick drum. I think what I'm going to do next is I want to open up the multimeter so I could keep an eye on my LUFS while this is playing. Okay, so what I'm seeing here is that my drums are too loud. And it doesn't hurt to overcompress your drums a little bit, especially if you're running them into a limiter. But what I want to see here is what these drums look like without a limiter on them. So I know a couple things here right away. It's pretty obvious to me which drums are causing problems. This one happens a lot, so you're going to duck a little bit. Okay, you need to come down by like that. And you need to come down slightly too. Okay, you still need to come down more. You still need to come down more. Okay, perfect. And as promised, we get to the kick drum. And I think the kick drum is actually the last offending culprit here. So we want to see whether or not this spikes significantly. If it's a tiny spike, I'm not too worried about it, but if it spikes into the red significantly, it's something I want to notice. Now, what I believe is going to happen is there's not going to be any major spikes without the kick drum, and then when we turn the kick drum on, there will be. So let's see. Okay, so one, I was wrong. That's a good thing because it tells me that there's something here to look for. And that tells me that actually the drums are the offender here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the drums back in. And remember, I have my limiter off on my master. Okay, I actually think it's the same snare that's causing the problem. But I think there's something else. So yeah, this I need to sidechain to the drums. This is a heavily distorted version of the subwoofer. The thought process here was that this overall was too loud because I saw this was peaking whenever this and the drums were kind of hitting at the same time. Okay, so I think this melodic actually is a little bit loud as well. So I'm going to pull it back a little bit more. For what is an older project and is decently messy, I think this makes sense. Yeah, this mid sub is way too loud. Okay, actually, that's pretty good. It has like kind of plus or minus 1 dB peaks every once in a while. There's a 2 dB peak towards the end, but I kind of want that to have a little bit more dynamics at that section. I'm not worried about that. That will get caught in the compressor. And I just wanted to say thank you. If this is interesting, I appreciate you taking the time out of your day. Hopefully this has been helpful for you as well. I just remember we never did the kick drum. When you add back in the kick drum, let's take another listen. And automatically we see that every time the kick hits, it is clipping. The way that I actually set up my kick drums is that I will have 2 different layers. I'll have the low end of my kick drum. Now the thing that I've learned is that a lot of kick drums, especially if you're using samples, might not necessarily have the punchiest mid end, or maybe as much as you want, but that's how you make a kick drum cut through a song. And you want the mid end to cut through because that's what you hear. You feel the low end. The low end doesn't even need to be that loud. This right over here is actually just the mid range of the kick, cutting off all of the low end. I can maybe even go a tiny bit higher there. What I'm able to do is I'm able to directly control just the middle of the kick with this and make it as punchy as I want. Now what I think is going on here is it's a little bit too punchy. I'm going to bring that down by 6 dB. And then this one I'm going to bring down by about 3.5 dB. And then let me listen to the mix again and see how that sounds. Okay, so I think I do need to pull back the drums a little bit. It's still a little bit too punchy. So I think what I need to do is duck all of this actually. I don't need that much. A little bit like that. I'm going to pull you back by 3. I'll just do 2 dB actually. And then pull you back by 2 dB. Okay, I think that is a lot more balanced. It does sound better. And that is a glimpse of time. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Hopefully you learned something if you make your own music. And I hope you have an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Talk to you later.